Hey, Alon.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, except of my painting is no muse and no progress. I need some stimulation.
I see. Okay. All right. So what are you working on right now?
I'm not working. That's my problem.
You're not doing anything?
I'm not doing anything. I cook
Oh, you cook. Okay.
sometimes.
Sometimes. Okay. All right. Well, here, let me, I need to download some photos. Maybe I can give you some stimulation there.
I would appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, because I had a little time this weekend, and one of the things that I ended up doing was Naomi had given me a whole bunch of like old canvases that she had picked up in the trash from one of her, like somebody in her neighborhood. And they had just taken a bunch of these canvases out there and, threw them away. And so okay, let's see what's going on here. It's going to run slowly. She went out and, gathered them all up and brought them over to Benson and, basically gave them.
Nice.
And so, one of the things I did this weekend was I took time to actually go and just, coat them out. I had some excess paint left
What
on the
sizes
top.
were they? What sizes were they?
About 20 by 24, 24, 30.
Oh, okay.
They were pretty good size, I mean, they were not huge, but, at the same time, pretty good size. So it was kind of a nice, a nice thing to have. And I'll show you what I was just playing. So, literally just playing. So, I just started throwing, some of the color that I had left on the palette from when I went to that figure drawing group. And let's see. And so, I just started kind of creating backgrounds and, just something that I can work on in the future. And so I'm downloading those. There we go. Okay. And I'll show you what they are. It's nothing real impressive, but let's see. All right. So let's see if we did put this out of the way. There we go. And we take that and we open it as a window. Thinking through all the steps here. All right. Okay. And now, got them to where I can actually share them with you. Yay. Okay. So like I said, these, they're about 20 by 24, 24, 30. They vary in size. But all I did was I just took the leftover paint that was on the palette and I just started laying on some color. And in some areas, you can still see the original painting on there. And, whoever had done these had really plowed on, quite a bit of oil paint and then cut back through it. So there's a texture as well. And, at first I was thinking I would get rid of it, but, as I started scumbling some color and stuff over it, I kind of liked, what was going on in that area. So I saved it and, went opaque in other areas and blocked some things out, but left other things. So now I've got, a kind of a nice background to work on if I want to. This was another one. And again, you can still see some of the original like texture and things to the painting. But, if I want to if I want to get rid of like that horizontal line is bugging me. So what I'll do is I'll let that dry totally. And then I'll come back in with some sandpaper and I'll just sand that out and then go back in and, lay more color down. But again, it kind of gives me, this color field that I can work into, just to kind of experiment and play. This one I thought was, fairly successful. Now it was the smoothest of all the canvases. It didn't really have, it's got a few, textural areas in it, but nothing really pronounced. And so this one was the easiest to kind of work over. And again, this is just, this is paint that probably would have sat on the palette and dried up over time. But, rather than letting it do that, I just went ahead and just took the paint and, started laying it in there and kind of, moving it around and trying to get some kind of, some kind of background. And then I'll show you this one. And this was another one of those that I actually started laying on, some color. And for some reason, I started seeing sort of these cloud shapes. And so that kind of inspired me to go ahead and, divide it up and make a landscape out of it. And so, I'm just painting over it, but I'm kind of creating this landscape with, the house over in Valley. And, so, I mean, you can do anything you really want to, as far as, creating images and stuff like that. Did that help any, Ilan?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, mainly the thing is, get a piece of paper, get a little paint, play with it. And don't just use the color right out of the tube. Try mixing different colors. Try,
Yeah,
even on the surface, try laying one color over another, but don't like paint it out opaquely. Let some of the other color come through it, from underneath, by scumbling, just kind of working just a little bit of color very gently over the top of another and just build it up. Now you're working in acrylics, right?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you could do that kind of stuff pretty quickly, and kind of come up with some interesting surfaces and things like that to work with. And you don't have to have an idea in mind. You could just actually work with the color and stuff and then kind of see what happens. Maybe you'd start having or seeing, like, I saw clouds in that one, maybe you would start seeing some shapes or something in there and want to develop it into that direction. Main thing is play.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Play with it. It doesn't have to be, serious and, all, technical and everything. The main thing is, you're just trying to stimulate yourself and get ideas and, try to create something that's kind of fun and that is, beautiful to you. Again, it could just be like color. If you like look at the painting like behind you, right, which is an abstract, but if you kind of forget the hard edges and things and just look at the colors and kind of how one color sort of blends and melds into another, you could make a painting just out of that. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Nobody sent anything in except for John, and I'm going to show you his paintings real quick, and then I want to.
I sent something in. It might have been 1:30, but I sent it in.
So did I.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't get it, and I just checked about 10 minutes ago. So, maybe it's,
On
yeah,
the
maybe
way in the clouds.
yeah, it's getting here maybe, but it's not here yet. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's take a look and see what John sent in. John, evidently it was raining over at his house. John, are you around?
I am there.
You are here. Okay. So this looks like a pretty rainy day out there.
rainy day, but it's a stock reference photo.
Oh, that's a stock reference photo?
That's not one that I took, no.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was about to say, it's raining a little harder at your house than it is at mine. It was,
And, well,
it was
this
raining.
morning was pretty hard.
Yeah, well, it rained here. It didn't rain that hard here. Yeah, that looks like a pretty serious downpour.
Yeah,
But,
so that's my reference photo.
Okay. And then and then you, I guess this was your first step, right?
Yes. And that's what I was trying to say this morning. Instead of drawing or putting in, I just tried to block out
Mhm.
color areas,
Okay.
the greens, the blue.
Right. And so, you've got it broken up into big, simple shapes right now. Okay. And
Right.
then you
Correct.
developed it further, like so.
No, the opposite.
Oh, it's the opposite? Oh, so
Yeah, this is the first. This is the first one.
okay. Yeah, I was about to
It's,
say it's like you tightened it up. And all right, so
Yeah.
this was the first one, and then you loosened
This
it
is
up.
the first one. Right.
Okay. Yeah, and then this is what you ended up with. And this, you see, now this to me looks more like a rainy day.
Correct. Right. What I did, I felt that it was the first one there. The colors were too warm,
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to cool it down a little bit. So I washed over the whole painting with a blue,
Mhm.
very washed out blue, and I used a diagonal stroke to get sort of that rain
Yeah.
effect coming up. So those are the steps I've taken so far.
Okay, yeah, so we went from here
What's going on?
Correct.
to here. Yeah, okay, yeah.
All right.
Well, you're certainly heading more in the right direction. So, since you have watercolor pencils and, color pencils and stuff like that, this might be a good opportunity actually to make this kind of a mixed media piece.
Okay.
And you could take like a white colored pencil or even a piece of pastel chalk or something and just reinforce, that diagonal with a little bit of like light.
Yeah, I wanted to somehow get some white into that.
Mhm. Yeah, and then it would give you more clearly the idea of that being in the middle of a rainstorm.
Should I define everything else a little more definite, like the tree, the
No,
plant?
no, no. Your color background is fine for it. I think all you really need, because really the subject is the rain, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so you could take a straight edge, right, and kind of set it at a diagonal and just kind of work, kind of randomly, making some streaks across there, to get that feeling of a rainy day.
Uh-huh.
And I think your background is soft enough. It does, if you look at your reference,
Yes,
that's kind of what it does. It's not all that sharp, right?
correct, right.
It's a little bit kind of hazy, blurry. And that's the effect that you kind of want to get to. And you're pretty close here. All you've got to do is, again, just work across it with those diagonals in some lighter value.
Right.
Because if you look at this, see, these are all, fairly like either kind of a light gray or, light violet.
Yes.
Now you could use,
So leave what I have the way it is, and then just work on the rain effect.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, why not? I mean, yeah. Now you might also, like in this area right in here, you've got it lighter. And in the reference, it looked even lighter.
Right.
So you could maybe lift a little more color out, like right over in here,
Okay.
to the right.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and just kind of bring that light across a little bit.
Right.
Now, you're not going to get it that light again, right?
Correct.
But you lift as much of that as you can out of it, and then let it dry, and I think you'll be fine.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And then you sent in your rework of your landscape.
That was a rework, right?
Right. And so, you know, when you're looking at this, I mean, can everybody kind of see how the like bottom half of the painting comes forward and the upper half of the painting sits back?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And so again, you know, it's that contrast that we're talking about. You know, he's got more contrast, you know, in this area than he does back here, right? And because this gets a little bit softer and a little less contrast in it, all of this sits in the background. All of this begins to move forward. Okay. So
Okay, now
it's
both of these, what I said, my new direction of trying to not draw ahead of time, but just start with paint.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. that's
You know,
what
when I work with watercolor, John, I never use a pencil. You know, and I'll just take my brush and I'll use, like I said, like an ochre or some kind of like yellow, because again,
Right.
I can just get it to sort of fuse into all the rest of the color there. And I'll just kind of rough out, you know, what it is that I want to paint, and then I start blocking in, you know, big blocks of color. Now, the difference between watercolor and like painting with oil or acrylic is the first couple of layers that you put on are going to be these lighter washes, right?
Mhm. Yes,
Yeah. I mean, it would be kind of in the general color family, you know, that
right.
you get to, but they're not all that dark. And usually it's like the, you know, 10th, 12th, or 15th pass of color before you really start, you know, popping in those dark, you know, colors in there. Because the watercolors, it's got to build up. You know, you got to build up the density of the pigment. So,
Right.
you know, and some people will work like wet into wet, you know, and that way those darks will just sort of kind of fall in there and soften and fuse. Other people will wait and let it dry so that they could get a sharper, harder edge on things.
Yeah, well, that's how both of my paint worked, wet on wet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to ask a question
Mm-hmm.
about center of the picture where it looks like the rocks are on the side of the stream. Are those rocks, like the edge of the stream, are those too dark right in the center of the picture? Right underneath the trees, kind of in the center
Like
of the
right
picture?
here,
No, back further.
back here.
No, come to right there.
There?
Yeah, should those be a little lighter?
Yeah, they could be, but yeah, I mean, they don't really bother me. You know, all of that's kind of back to the middle ground, and you can read them as rocks. You can read them as, you know, like, you know, reeds or grass or something at the edge of the water, the stream. You know, they could be anything you want them to be. Okay. You know, but you could knock them back a little bit, you know, by just taking a little water, put it on top of it, and then, you know, taking a paper towel and just, you know, lifting a little color out. That might help because they are as dark and just about actually as large as some of your shapes up in here.
Correct.
Actually. So yeah, you know, if that really bothers you, yeah, you could always go back and just tweak it a little bit, you know. But overall, I mean, the effect is, you know, he's got some nice depth and distance in here, and all of this is really coming forward. Yeah. So he's got this feeling of it actually moving in space now, where the other day it wasn't quite doing that yet.
Right.
So you know, just sometimes little subtle things can make, you know, a big difference. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So guess what?
We are finished.
No, we're not.
Oh.
You didn't think I was going to let you get away that easy, did you? Like, Okay, guys, here's like 4 or 5 pieces of work. I'll see you later. Now, but I want to introduce you to an artist, okay? And you ladies will probably like her a lot. Her name is Alice Neal. She lived in New York. I think she passed away, it was like in the late 80s, okay? But they're having a retrospective show of hers at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it's it's a virtual art tour.
Oh.
But there's a video on her, and it's really good. And I had seen some articles and things written about her, and seen some of her work. I really didn't have a good grasp on kind of the variety of work that she did. But as a contemporary modern painter, I think she's well worth looking at, and I think you guys will like her work a little bit. It's sometimes it's a little irreverent, sometimes it's very political, but there's an element to it that is very human and very approachable. So anyway, take a look at her, and we'll enjoy this video together. Let's see if I can get that up there. Okay. And she's got some interesting stuff. It should bring up some interesting comments and questions, I think. So
I'm Max Hollein, the Marina Kellen French Director of the Met, and I'm delighted that you could join us virtually to celebrate the opening of Alice Neal, People Come First. Tonight you will get a glimpse into the first retrospective of Alice Neal's work to appear in a New York museum in over 2 decades. This ambitious career-spanning survey positions Neal as one of the century's most radical painters. You will see her artistic brilliance in more than 100 paintings, drawings, and watercolors. You will experience Neal's oeuvre, her pictures of people, as moving, authentic, true portraits of people and the time they live in. Throughout the show, Alice Neal shines as a champion of civil rights and social justice, whose long-standing commitment to humanist principles define both her personal and public identities. As a self-proclaimed collector of souls, Neal painted people from all walks of life, from friends and family to activists and intellectuals, from neighbors in Spanish Harlem to fellow artists and performers. These forthright and intimate portraits radiate her fierce personal belief in humanity's inherent dignity and a steadfast social conscience. Neal was one of the greatest chroniclers of 20th century America. Journeying through the exhibition, we can admire her ability to not only capture the psyche of the individual, but also reflect the era in which she lived, particularly the unique character of New York. Throughout her nearly 70-year career, Neal remained true to her own vision, despite many obstacles. And today, her imagery resonates with our own challenging cultural and political circumstances in truly striking ways. Of course, many friends and colleagues contributed to the success of this project, both here at the Met and beyond. We are grateful to Sheena Wagstaff, Leonard A. Lauder, chairman of Modern Contemporary Art, who initially conceived the idea for an exhibition on Alice Neal. Kelly Baum, Cynthia Hazen-Polsky, and Leon Polsky, curator of contemporary art, and Randall Griffith, curator of modern contemporary art, who you'll hear from in just a minute, developed its curatorial vision and content, conducting extensive research in the Neal archives and uncovering many new revelations. I would also like to thank the entire team at the Met, working on bringing this exhibition and the accompanying publication and digital features to fruition. These were challenging times to accomplish a major project. With many loans, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to the artist's family, in particular Ginny and Hartley Neal, and to all of our institutional and private lenders, without whom this project would have been inconceivable. A special thank you to Philips for sponsoring this evening, and many thanks are also owed to the donors to the exhibition, including the Barry A. and Dee Dee Wigmore Foundation, the Adrian Arsht Fund for Resilience Through Art, Angela A. Chow and Jim Breyer, Agnes Gund, and the Jane and Robert Carroll Fund. Its stunning catalog was made possible by the Samuel I. Newhouse Foundation, Daryl and Stephen Roth, So-Yun Locks, the Locks Foundation, and the Antoinette Kraushaar Fund. Finally, I want to acknowledge our exhibition touring partners, the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao and the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, who will bring Neil's art to even wider audiences in the months ahead. Without further ado, here's Kelly and Randy to introduce us to Alice Neel's daringly honest work.
Hello and welcome. I'm Randy Griffey.
And I'm Kelly Baum. Randy and I are co-curators of Alice Neel, People Come First.
This exhibition is a career-spanning retrospective of the work of this beloved and revered American artist of the 20th century. The exhibition focuses on her renowned and popular paintings that Neel liked to call pictures of people, not portraits. It also includes works by Neel in other genres, including still life, cityscape, early erotic watercolors, and works on paper, but also personal effects and photographs drawn from the Neel estate and ephemera connected to Neel's life and activities, especially her political affiliations that provide a kind of personal insight into Neel and her art. The exhibition is meant to be expansive to provide this fully fleshed picture of Neel as one of the great American artists of the 20th century.
Alice Neel was born in 1900 and died in 1984, so her life spans almost the whole of the 20th century, as does her career. The earliest painting in the show is from the 1920s, and the latest work was made in 1984, the year she died. Neel herself was a woman who refused to settle for her lot in life. She was a mother. She had 4 children, one who died. She was also ambitious at a moment when women weren't expected to be ambitious, and at a moment when women weren't really supposed to be artists. And even though she raised children and worked very hard to raise her children, she was committed to her own independence and autonomy.
The subtitle, People Come First, is actually drawn from an interview Neel gave in 1950, where she said, for her, people come first. Her devotion to pictures of people had very much to do with her enduring humanism. She was humanistic in her sensibilities and felt that her art was, to some extent, a buffer against multiple dehumanizing forces in American culture, including capitalism, and much of her work comes from that political perspective.
This is Margaret Evans' Pregnant from 1978. It's probably my favorite work in the exhibition. It's the first painting by Neel that you see as you approach the exhibition galleries. Neel painted a number of women nude while they were pregnant, and she really preferred to paint women near the ends of their pregnancies when their bodies were at their most extreme and most plastic. Neel painted Margaret Evans when she was pregnant with twins. One of the things I love about this painting is the attention that Neel paid, not just to Margaret Evans' body, but to her pregnant body, to all the ways that women's bodies are made unfamiliar by virtue of pregnancy. Her enlarged nipples, her engorged veins, her swollen belly, the mottled flesh of her legs and feet and ankles. That look on Margaret Evans' face, too, is unforgettable. She looks expectant in all kinds of ways, physically and also psychologically. Her eyes are wide. She seems slightly terrified and uncertain of what's happening to her. This is a really important painting because there were many subjects that Neel painted that she shouldn't have painted. And so in the same way that Neel did things that women weren't supposed to do or weren't expected to do, she also painted people that she wasn't supposed to or wasn't expected to, and she did so in ways that were also unusual and unconventional.
From a certain perspective, the exhibition is also about New York, or more specifically, Neel's long engagement with the city.
Neel was born outside of Philadelphia, and she came to New York for the first time with her husband, Carlos, in the late 1920s. They lived in the Bronx, they left for a few years, and then Neel came back in the early 1930s. She lived and worked in New York. She was a New Yorker, and with the exception of a few paintings she made, everything she created, everything she produced was in New York and was of New York, was about New York.
New York was certainly Neel's greatest muse and her most faithful subject. She painted its people, she painted its places, and her art was coextensive with her life and environment. So Neil captured the beauty of New York, but also the challenges of New York, and especially those effects as they're manifested on the people, the residents of New York. This is a painting dating to 1936 called, quite plainly, Nazis Murder Jews. The painting evokes a May Day parade from 1936 that Neil may or may not have attended, but she certainly knew about. The painting really highlights Neil's engagement with pressing political and historical issues of her day, and the degree to which communist organizations were really on the front end of calling attention to the discrimination and slaughter of Jews in Germany. Neil's painting suggests the immense size of this protest parade, but the painting also gives a sense of how organized and peaceful it was. People sometimes overlook the fact that she was very much engaged in life on the street and politics on the street, and this painting is a really good example of that aspect of her life and art. We're looking at a double portrait by Neil, dating from her many, many years living and working in Spanish Harlem. These two beautiful young girls, Antonia and Carmen, were neighbors of Neil's. And it just gives a great sense of Neil's connection to her sitters, regardless of their age. She treated children with the same kind of intensity and seriousness and engagement as she did her adult sitters. And I think it really comes through here. These two girls, their expressions here are so poignant and to some extent maybe inquisitive, but absolutely not sentimental. They are looking clear-eyed at you. They don't shy from us. They are sitting quite still and holding their presence and look at us as equals. They're so engaging as sitters, partly because of Neil's technique, which has, in certain passages, quite a high level of finish and detail, whereas others are left quite abstract. Neil is drawing our attention as viewers very much to their faces and to their eyes, where Neil has really attended most intensely to their likenesses, which helps to make you feel connected to them as well.
The second section of the exhibition is devoted to the subject of home. Neil never had the money to rent her own studio. She was also raising two sons on her own, and for both of those reasons, she had to paint at home in whatever room wasn't occupied by other people. So her home was always the stage, the setting for her portrait and still lives, but it also becomes very much an actor or protagonist in these paintings. Neil also painted activities that happened inside of the home, like lovemaking, like child rearing, like painting. One of the highlights is a series of watercolors and pastels that Neil made in the mid to late 1930s, erotic watercolors and pastels. These are some of the most radical works that she produced over the course of her career, and more than one very prominent feminist art historian, including Linda Nochlin, called Neil out for praise precisely because she appropriated the genre of erotica for women. Historically, women appear in erotic paintings as the object of an almost always male gaze. In these watercolors and pastels, though, Neil is very much the agent of desire. In Alice and Jose from 1938, we see Neil herself. This is one of her very rare self-portraits. She's lying in bed, eyes closed, with her partner, Jose, a Puerto Rican musician with whom she had her first son, Richard. And I think about all that was going on in Neil's life in 1938. She was fiercely and with great determination making a name, a career for herself. She recently joined the Federal Art Project. In 1935, she became a member of the Communist Party. And it was that same year that she produced her first erotic watercolor. And I think about all the revolutions that were happening in Neil's life in the mid to late 1930s. And these were revolutions of her own making. They were political revolutions, and they were sexual revolutions, and they play out in these works so wonderfully. This is Hartley on the Rocking Horse from 1943. It's a portrait of Neil's second son, Hartley, who is 2 or 3. He's sitting astride a rocking horse that Neil found and repainted for her son. Hidden in the background is another one of Neil's very rare self-portraits, and you see her reflected in a mirror, painting the very picture that we see in front of us. I think it's a very deliberate nod to Las Niñas by Velázquez. Neil definitely knew her history, and she was aware very much of the conventions of artists' self-portraits. This painting exemplifies the double role that Neil's home played, but it also dramatizes conflict that Neil spoke about throughout her life, which is the conflict between motherhood and career.
A large and important subgroup of Neil's output focuses on pictures of activists, artists, civil rights leaders, feminist leaders, and other personalities to whom she was drawn. As quite a nonconformist herself, Neil was particularly drawn to unusual subjects and unusual sitters who were pushing boundaries and in some cases made people a little bit uncomfortable or were flaunting norms. And in that sense, I think Neil had great affection for them and feeling a connection to especially her sitters who were sort of operating outside of conventional society. To my mind, this is one of Neil's greatest paintings from the 1970s. Jackie Curtis, whom you see on the right with the red hair and the black stockings, was quite a character and became a kind of cult figure in the Lower East Side counterculture through the late 60s and into the 1970s, and was gender non-conforming from the very beginning of Jackie Curtis's career. But what I think is very interesting about this painting of Curtis by Neil is it really suggests Jackie Curtis's lust for the spotlight. Jackie showed up for the sitting with friend and sometimes collaborator Rita Red, whom Neil opted then also to paint. You see Jackie Curtis leaning forward and even sort of beginning to press Rita Red, unfortunately, out of the painting, despite the fact Rita Red looks like a kind of buttress who is holding Jackie Curtis up. But that, I think, was to some extent indicative of their relationship. And Neil is really alluding to that here, and specifically Curtis's almost insatiable desire for celebrity.
Counterculture is the largest section of the show, and you'll find in this section pictures of underground performers and artists, but you'll also find portraits of labor union organizers, members of the Communist Party, very prominent feminists, and these groups mixed. Neil was herself an artist and a communist, and so this section is really meant to point to and dramatize the overlap of art and politics in Neil's life as well as in her painting. And that plays out, of course, in her choice of subject. James Farmer was a co-founder of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, which he helped establish in Chicago in 1942. It was informed by Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent protest or action. CORE played a really key role in sit-ins, boycotts, voter registration drives, the March on Washington. Farmer himself was responsible for initiating and organizing the Freedom Rides, which is probably what he's most famous for. One of the points we want to get across as much as possible in the exhibition is that the meaning of Neil's paintings reside not just in who she painted, but how she painted them. And so to my eyes, Neil communicates not just Farmer's personality, his sense of conviction. She communicates his politics through formal and stylistic choices. Farmer, who was a
Sorry about that. In that, back to where we were.
large man in life and in reputation feels compressed into the four walls of this canvas, which makes him feel bigger, actually, and more powerful because it contains his energy. The pose of the body communicates tension and energy held in reserve. This picture of Andy Warhol is important because this isn't the Andy Warhol that we know in 2021, nor do I think it's the Andy Warhol that most people would have known in 1970. Andy Warhol was known for very carefully managing his self-image, and that self-image was always based on control. It was defined by its lack of passion, was insistently kind of neutral. But here, Warhol seems to submit entirely to Neil, and he relinquishes that sense of stagecraft for which he's so famous. First and foremost, he's partially nude. And because he's nude, he's exposing to the viewer's gaze the scars from the attempt on his life from 1968. He's also exposing to view the corset that he wore around his lower abdomen for support. His eyes are closed, and that too, I think, is very significant because Andy Warhol, when he was alive, he was always the one looking. He was the one behind the camera. He was doing the shooting and the making, but here he is rendered absolutely passive and completely vulnerable. I think it's important too that in this instance, Neil chose to leave a great deal of the canvas unfinished. Neil was known, especially towards the end of her life, to leave more and more of her canvases on or underpainted. For Neil, an unfinished painting was a modern painting, to leave traces of her brushwork, of her method, of her hand. But I think in the case of this portrait of Andy Warhol, the unfinishedness also operates symbolically. It signals a being that is himself unfinished or undone, a being that's trapped in a state of arrested development, much like the painting itself. This painting, Futility of Effort, was made in 1930 and is meant to distill into a very abstract, very monochromatic painting two experiences. The first was the loss of her daughter, Santiana, to diphtheria in 1927. And the second was the death of a child she read about in a local newspaper, a child who had died by choking on the bars of a crib while its mother was working in a room next door. Neil was so moved by these two experiences, which are the experiences of mothers, that she decided to make this painting. Neil described The Futility of Effort as one of her most revolutionary paintings, and we might think that was because it is one of her most abstract, one of her most economical paintings, but I think it's more likely that she considered it revolutionary because it gave visual expression to real female experiences, not sugar-coated or romanticized female experiences, but real, tough, concrete, hard as nails female experiences. Those were not considered proper subjects for art, whether by men or by women. And Neil, really early on, beginning in the 1930s, just threw that convention out the door.
One of the large sections in the exhibition calls out Neil's really powerful, long-standing engagement with the subject of motherhood in her art. Neil was herself a mother, and so in this regard was connected to her sitters. In a way, Neil's depictions of mothers are connected to what she called the great dichotomy in her own life, where she, of course, loved her children, but she also wanted to paint. And as a woman artist, she felt pulled in these two often diametrically opposed directions. The painting here focuses on a very renowned and recently deceased groundbreaking feminist art historian by the name of Linda Nochlin. Nochlin was part of the circles of feminists that Neil herself began to orbit in the 1970s onward. And this is just such a beautiful depiction of Linda Nochlin with her daughter Daisy. You get a sense of Linda Nochlin's great intellect, but she's also, of course, very close with her daughter, who seems to be squirming just a bit, and Linda Nochlin is working, you can see a little bit, to try to keep her daughter sitting still. One of the many, many beautiful details and elements of this picture is that both their left hands appear on the arm rest. And in a way, I think they are placed there by Neil as a kind of comparison. And so you have Daisy's very youthful small hand with Linda Nochlund's mature hand, a hand that is beginning to show some effects of age, maybe. So there's a beautiful sense of a generational relationship between them, of course, but it also evokes stages in life as represented by this mother and this child. Neil engaged with the poignant, powerful, and complicated subject and experience of motherhood, both before birth and after birth. This image, which is entitled Childbirth from 1939, in particular, highlights the fact that as an artist, Neil goes places few artists, if any artists, especially women artists of her generation and of this early period of the 30s, dared to go. To portray something as sacred and culturally valued as motherhood as an excruciating, almost nightmarish experience in this instance is just something not a lot of artists, even today, would have the bravery to do. Neil was a great student of the history of art and also was very much aware of the art of her own day. So we're taking the opportunity by drawing on the great treasures of the Met's collection to establish some dialogues between Neil's art and some art of her contemporaries, but also art by older artists that she sometimes invoked.
Neil was always reluctant to admit to having been influenced by another artist. She really fiercely guarded her originality and autonomy, and I think that's in part because she was a woman who had to fight for every prompt. We know, though, that she, at the very least, admired Kang Sooteen's work, and I think this comparison between Still Life with Rayfish and Thanksgiving, one of Neil's funniest and most irreverent paintings, is very instructive. Both works are slightly hallucinogenic, thanks to that tilted vertiginous point of view. The loose brushwork, the kind of liberties that both artists take with realism, with representation, the way those recognizable subjects, the food, the fish, the fowl, the way they dissolve into abstraction by virtue of that loose brushwork. Neil was an artist who, for all her irreverence and radicalism, really operated within art history's dominant genres, the portrait, the still life, the landscape. But she overturned and adapted and subverted those genres at the same time. So she kind of operated inside and outside those art historical traditions simultaneously.
As an artist who was very much engaged in the history of art, it was almost inevitable that Neil would engage with the nude. But she does so, like always, in a way that is unflinching, as a counter to the historical and typical depictions of bodies as beautiful, as perfect. Neil's bodies are, by contrast, distinctly imperfect, as she thought humanity itself was beautifully imperfect.
The only self-portrait Neil painted in which she is the principal figure didn't occur until 1980. Neil was by this point 80 years old, and I think it's incredible. She waited to make her first true self-portrait until she was an older woman nearing the end of her life, and she decided to depict herself nude. The body that you see in this painting, this nude, elderly female body, is simply one that, like the pregnant nude, is one that really never had a place in art history. And its absence is something that Neil wants very much to correct. It's meant to be provocative. It's meant to be subversive. It's meant to draw attention to long-held stereotypes. It was her own personal response to a trope within the feminist art movement.
Her nude portrait of the art critic John Perrault is perhaps one of the, if not the most memorable male nude Neil painted. This is this wonderfully disarming, casual depiction of Perrault in all of his gangly, hairy glory in a pose which is very much like a classic odalisque out of art history, a fact that would not have been lost on Neil. And in a way, she's painting Perrault in this manner as a kind of tongue-in-cheek foil to this history of the odalisque, except her odalisque is distinctly male. calling attention to Neil's great skill as a painter and as a colorist, what's wonderful here with regard to palette is the warmth of his tanned body offset by the cool blue rendering of the sheet that he's on, which enhances the immediacy and the warmth of his body. While Neil is remembered primarily as a figurative painter, she was, over the course of her career, engaged very much with issues around abstraction. So we have a section of the exhibition that really focuses specifically on Neil's relationship with abstraction over a range of subjects, including still life. Neil isn't thought of as a still life painter, but she painted still life throughout her career, and she was actually very proud of her abilities in this genre. Images like this still life with fruit from 1940 give a little window on her life at home. In this context, though, we want to call attention to the degrees to which and the ways in which Neil's work is also operating abstractly. And it's so clear and beautiful here in her simplified depiction of these fruits in a bowl, which she has rendered in these luscious, bright, direct passages of impasto paint. She often is experimenting with the relationship between a two-dimensional plane and a three-dimensional space. So there's almost always this tension in Neil's work that you see from very early, really through the very end.
Black Draftee James Hunter was completed in 1965. It depicts a man named James Hunter that Neil met on the streets of New York. Neil invited him to her apartment for a sitting. They had at least one or two sittings. It's not clear from the painting. She got at least as far as outlining the figure in her beautiful line, filling in most of the head and neck and one of the hands. But the rest of the figure remains incomplete. And the story goes that Hunter was never able to return for his second or third or fourth sitting because he was called away to the Vietnam War. Thus the painting's title, Black Draftee. Now, even though Neil wasn't able to complete the painting, she decided that it was finished. So here, the unfinished nature of the painting tells an almost heartbreaking story about the vulnerability, the ephemerality of human life, but also the life of this particular Black man, subject to the whims of the US government and sent to die for a country that probably wouldn't have mourned his life. Neil was a survivor. She made paintings and pictures about surviving, about what it meant for her as a woman and a mother and an artist to survive. But she also produced a large number of works about other people's, other New Yorkers' struggle to survive. She lived her life as a political creature, and she painted as a political creature. And her politics are expressed in her paintings, not just through who she chose to depict, whether famous or unknown, but through the way she chose to paint them.
In the wake of renewed and powerful and persuasive calls for social justice, Neil's legacy seems ever more germane to our moment. And that is one of her great and enduring attributes.
Any thoughts about that?
Looks like all of her, not all of them, but most of her paintings are all outlined in blue.
Blue, black, yeah. She
Yeah.
used, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she definitely had a very contemporary approach, you know, to painting the figure. And it was, you know, partially much like the post-impressionist and then the early abstract painters, line was one of the elements, you know, that she used in just about all of her work, to some degree or another. And, you know, the other part that really kind of sets her apart is that if you look at traditional portraits, pretty much so, you know, the artists who paint portraits pretty much they'll cover the canvas, you know, from corner to corner, you know, and they don't really feel like the work is complete until, you know, every inch of that canvas is covered. In Neil's particular approach, you know, she did, you know, just enough, you know, to get the figure on there. And, you know, she didn't always finish it, you know, as far as completing and covering every inch of that canvas. And, you know, for her, yep, the work was, you know, complete. It's like once she got sort of the feel of who that person was, and she made a statement about them, and she felt like she had that on the canvas, you know, she stopped, she walked away, and that was enough, you know.
Well, portraits are more loose than, if you do a portrait, it's really tight.
Mhm.
Hers is very loose, whether, you know, it's completed, the ears are not painted or what, but her painting is a lot looser than just a straight portrait painting of
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, she wouldn't be what you would call a traditional portraitist by any means, you know. But still, you know, and she never called her works portraits. You know, she called them paintings of people, and it wasn't so much about getting a photographic likeness of the person as much as it was, I think, about telling the story about who they were and what their circumstances were. So.
I feel her paintings are very realistic and
Mhm.
impression. She's an impressionist, that's for sure.
Hmm.
But I liked her work. Some of it looked incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
It still impressed me a lot, being incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed it, and she looked like she had fun doing it.
Yeah, she definitely had a passion, you know, for painting. And I mean, you know, that exhibition has about 100 paintings, but that by no means was the vast majority of her work. You know, that was just a very small, you know, sampling of the work that she produced during her lifetime. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
She painted the sofa and left one of the legs unpainted.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's like, okay, so you know it's a sofa, so, you know, it's like, why, you know.
The people are more important. She said that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's about the people. So.
I especially like the pregnant women
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, the women most times are thought of as, you know, nymphets or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like the idea that, you know, that what a woman really is. You know, I like that she made sure that we know that that's where our beauty actually lies.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Okay.
She was a little ahead of her time, I think, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think she was like way ahead of her time.
Right.
Because during that time, you know, you couldn't even go to the office if you had a maternity dress on.
Right.
Early 40s and 50s and things like that.
Right.
So, you know, you had to hide your belly.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it was just not for mixed company.
Right.
You know, good grief! How do you think we got here?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, you know, if you look at her work and you look at her life in historical context, all right? You know, growing up in Philadelphia, you know, basically born right at 1900, right? And just if you can imagine, what was life like in 1900 for women? See?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, it had not been, you know, it had been less than, what, 10 years, 20 years? Probably 10 years before, you know, I mean, the women's suffrage movement had just happened about, you know, maybe 15, 20 years before her life began. And so, you know, she grew up in a household with values and norms and things like that, that still kind of, harken back to that, late Victorian age and those same principles and things. And for her to take the approach in life that she did, both politically as well as socially, that was a fairly bold and daring thing to do.
Right.
It didn't make her life any easier. Let's put it that way. So, so she was always out there, on the edge, always looking for, ways of having her art speak to people and make them more conscious and aware, of, a different view of America, I guess, the country that, she lived in. So, United States. So,
Like how she painted James Former. Like she,
Mhm.
she said she wanted him to be powerful, wanted him to fill up the whole picture.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then in the Warhol, she wanted to show his vulnerability that he didn't want nobody to ever see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, it's a lot of people don't really know this about Warhol, but I think there were like 2 different attempts on his life at various times, because there were seriously some people who didn't like what he did, and one time they were almost successful in killing him.
So he painted soup cans. Well, what do you mean? What he did?
Well, yeah, you might think of him just as soup cans, but the fact is that was actually kind of in the middle to later part of his career. The art that he produced previous to that was highly political, and the people that he did. I mean, everybody remembers his Marilyn Monroe, but how about Mao Zedong? How about Stalin? And what was the other one? Anyway, yeah, he did.
Scarlet who?
Pardon?
You said Scarlet?
Stalin, as in from Russia.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Mhm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Very
So yeah, it was kind of controversial art, and his political views were controversial as well. And remember too that somewhere around right around after World War II, we had the quote unquote Red Scare, right? All of a sudden it's like, the Cold War was kind of in, and you had gone through a political period in this country where, up until the Great Depression, there was, the Communist Party in this country, and there was a Communist Party in this country, by the way, for those of you who don't know that, was very, very active in organizing workers to form unions and trying to give workers more power and things like that. And, somewhere, well, it was really in about the mid 30s, big money interest, bankers and, financiers and things started pushing back against that because, for them, it wasn't really particularly good for business. If you paid workers more, then, you couldn't exploit them. So, people like the Morgans and folks like that, they were not big fans of the creation of unions and things like that. So they were very much so antithetical to a lot of what you would say progressive and creative communities that, fostered ideas of collaboration and workers' rights and, equality. you know, they didn't want any part of that. So yeah, that made many artists targets. You know, we saw it real clearly right after World War II, particularly with writers, actors, but that also applied to visual artists as well. And there were many visual artists who were assaulted, beaten, thrown in jail, you know, spent time in prison, you know, for their, you know, connection, you know, political connections. So, you know, that's a period of time that, you know, a lot of people, you know, historically, you know, within the context of art, a lot of art historians don't talk about. But there were many of, you know, our homegrown American artists. You know, these are not people who were imported from Europe. These were, you know, people who grew up right here, who ended up spending time in prison because they were members of the Communist Party. And they went to jail for, you know, some of them, you know, 10 years of their life. So
I'm ashamed to say about as much as I know about the Communist Party is about The Way We Were, the movie The Way We Were.
Yeah.
That about encompasses all I know about the Communist Party. And I do know that they accused blacks when they wanted to become free from sharecropping of being part of the Communist Party. But as I say, I know very little about it except for
yeah. Well, it's an interesting part of American history, and it's you know, you can pretty much so almost draw a line from the about the 1910 all the way through about the 1970s. You know, and a lot of that history has just been erased. You know,
right?
You know, people act like it never happened. You know, you watch
old movies, some stuff just come through. You know.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you know, you had the period of J. Edgar Hoover, right? And you know, his whole push was, you know, against, you know, the Communist Party in America, and it happened for several reasons. You know, one was the connection to, you know, the communist movement in both China and in Russia, but it was more around, you know, big money interest being against labor organizations, unionization, you know, workers' rights, things like that. You know, we lived in a capitalist country, you know, and capitalists wanted to, you know, practice, you know, free reign capitalism, you know, and basically exploit, you know, anybody they could for a profit. So that's, you know, that's what was going on, you know, but yeah, that's it's history. It's just, you know, kind of what happened. And getting back,
because it's all been taken away.
Right.
Well, I can barely hear you. I'm sorry. What did you say?
Jean, you want to say that again?
I said that nobody will know what happened because it's all been erased.
Right. Yes. Yeah. You know,
you may have to look a little harder, but not quite.
Look up things because you'll never know previously what happened. You're trying to erase everything.
Right. Yes. It's called revisionist history. You know, and you know, that's one of the things that's happened historically, you know, over not just in this country, but really all over the world. You know, the people who write the history books are the people who, you know, who won. So it's their view. You know, you very seldom hear the other side of it. You know, it's almost never hear the side of, you know, being Native American in this country, right? You know, and you know, the view of, you know, that group of people versus the rest of society. And so, you know, there's some interesting stories out there, and they're not easy to find, you know, because, you know, the powers that be, you know, make it difficult to find. So,
Need to write books about the history that has been taken away from the history books.
right.
Or
Yeah.
has been thrown out of the history books.
Yeah, actually, there are actually several books out, that talk exactly about that, and bring up, those things that are totally erased.
Indians treated and a lot of other things.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Anyhow, anybody else got anything to say about that film? No? Anybody want to share anything? Man,
I want to ask, are we having class Friday?
are we having class Friday?
Are we having class on Friday?
I believe so, yes. Yeah. Now, we may not have
Oh.
class Monday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I still have to ask that. Oh, by the way, I need to send you guys an email. I wanted to let you know Anita Stewart will be in Sandy Springs, over there by the Trader Joe's where the Pier 1 was. Anita Stewart is the brush lady. Okay. So if anybody needs brushes, things like that, I'm going to be over there right around about, between 12 and 12:30. I think we're going to start about 12:30, and she's going to have brushes and things out there. So if you need art supplies or whatever, stop by.
When?
What day?
This is at in Sandy Springs, out there right by the Trader Joe's.
Not well, but what date?
Tomorrow.
Monday, Tuesday? Oh, tomorrow.
Thursday.
Tomorrow.
Yes. Yeah, I just heard from her last night, so I need to send an email out to you guys. And I'll put the address in there for you, okay? But
You need to let you know a little earlier than the day before.
Well, yeah, a lot of times, we don't know with her because if she's going up there I think she's going to go up to Abernathy Arts Center, and she's meeting some people up there, and then she's going to go over to Trader Joe's. And, if anybody, needs some brushes or whatever. So when I get off the computer here, I will send that email and the information to you guys. And like I said, I'll be there right around about, we're going to get started at about 12:30, but I'm going to get out there about 12 o'clock and help her set up and, get ready to go.
And the emails,
Good time.
you send us the emails of the color. There was some color, not the color wheel, but some color. I forgot what we were discussing. That was on the TV and on the Zoom.
Uh-huh.
And you
I-
send,
Yeah, I thought I did that.
well, I didn't get it. I don't know.
Did anybody get that stuff?
No, I didn't get it too.
You
No,
didn't?
I don't believe so.
What is it?
It's the stuff I showed the other day, the color wheel, the color isolator, the value scale in color.
I got it.
Well,
Yeah.
I didn't.
I didn't get it.
Okay, I'll include it. Okay, it's not a problem. Okay. All right. Yeah, because I want to make sure you guys get those things because
Well, I would
they're
like that.
they're useful. They're useful tools. You might.
There was also something with the cutting of the holes in a cardboard or something.
Yeah,
for
that's called a color isolator.
the-
Mhm.
That I would like to see.
Yeah. Yeah, you just got to print it out, and then after that, trim it out with a pair of scissors and cut the hole out in the center.
But I
Okay.
gotta see it first.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Charles,
Yes.
about Alice Neal, I'm sorry, you asked before if we had another comment, and
Uh-huh.
personally, I see, if I may say something about it,
Uh-huh.
she seemed to get the essence of whatever it is she wanted to express without nitpicking too much or trying to complete to perfection every detail, which I thought was something to learn from.
Yeah.
For me.
hmm Yeah, I mean, she was, she was very much so a contemporary painter, and she gave you just enough, and she, when she got to where she wanted to go, that was done, you know, and time to move on. So, you know, that is a good lesson, you know, because one of the hardest things I know for myself, and I know we've had this conversation before, is like, you know, when do you know you're done? You know, when do you know when to stop? You know?
It reminded me a little bit, Egon Schiele had some, when he would focus on one area, mostly the face or part of the body, and the rest of it was simply very lightly drawn.
Right.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Sheila's work. And yeah, he would do that as well. Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, her work and Sheila's work are kind of similar, you know, in ways. You know, particularly in the approach to applying color and paint. So yeah, very, very direct. So, okay.
I just wanted to say in regard to Friday afternoon session, I don't do any drawing, so I won't be submitting anything.
Okay.
So other people, let's get going and submit your drawings.
Yeah. Yeah.
The goal is that he don't talk. It ain't no in between. No, you don't want to get across on the only.
Okay, I guess somebody's having a conversation in the background. Okay, anybody else got anything they want to bring up before we go away? All right, well, thank you all for coming, and hopefully we'll see you Friday. If you can make it out to see Anita tomorrow, that would be great. You know, we'll get out there and.
I'm gonna try.
Yeah, yeah. So anyhow, I'll send that out and say the next 20 to 30 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
So check your email. It should be there. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Stay dry. Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank